Today I'll be expanding on the topics from part 1 and introduce some new concepts in this video. Enjoy. Tracking. We're going to start with tracking. When the enemy is tracking you, they have two ways of tracking you, either actively or passively. Active tracking is when the enemy has to move their mouse a lot to keep track of you. The enemy actively tracks you when they expect you to go off their screen or their movement pattern forces them to actively track you. On the other hand, passive tracking is when the enemy doesn't move their mouse, barely moves their mouse, or moves their mouse randomly to keep track of you. The enemy passively tracks you when you keep strafing in place and they expect you to stay on the screen doing that, or their movement pattern allows them to not track you as much. Now, how do we counter these two tracking patterns? You counter active tracking by changing your strafes or movement to rhythm and stabbing when you expect the enemy to turn enough for you to get a stab to rhythm. When you change your movement to the enemy's rhythm, you expect the enemy to turn away from you even more every time they turn. If you want them to turn even more, use head faking. If that doesn't work, then try reverse head faking. Now I'll be moving on to the counter to passive tracking. You counter passive tracking by going around the enemy's closest side to you and stabbing when you expect to have access to their back or get into a back pedal. When going around the enemy, they might not be looking away from you enough to get a stab. You usually counter this by employing a technique I call twitching. Twitching is when you switch where you're going for a brief instant, then go back to where you're going again. This method makes the enemy turn less or makes them turn away from you. You can use twitching when going around the enemy, strafing in the other direction for a brief moment to keep them passive and to make them turn away or turn less. You can also use twitching in backpedals. You can go forwards for a brief instant in your backpedal to make the enemy turn away from you so you can access their back. You can switch between a strafe key and W when doing a back pedal to do a twitch pedal. You can replace your complement twitching with a head fake to make the enemy turn less or away from you when the enemy is passively tracking you. The enemy can switch from active to passive tracking and vice versa. They go from active to passive tracking if they expect you to stay on their screen, and from passive to active tracking if they expect you to go off their screen. The enemy can also go from passive to active tracking if they want to get a hit on you, which is why you should keep track of their attack rhythm as well. When the enemy goes from passive to active, then they're extremely active for a short amount of time. Make sure to take advantage of this. Passive and active tracking is a spectrum, but you should treat it as a binary when playing, so you can use the best strategy to get closer to their back at all times, and employ bait to get to their back sooner as well. If the enemy was perfectly tracking you, then they would literally be unstoppable with sidestep. They would be perfectly balanced between active and passive tracking. So, you don't want to be predictable when you're moving. You want to have some unpredictability and bait in your movement to keep the enemy guessing, and they'll have to double down into passive tracking or active tracking when dealing with certain movement that is very hard to predict. And if you do your job well, you can push the enemy into the far ends of the active and passive tracking spectrum with your bait and unpredictability, that it becomes way easier and faster to stab the enemy when you use the active or passive counters. You can make the enemy lower their rhythm and make them passively track you by either being extremely predictable or unpredictable. Two examples of this are jiggling and spinning. In jiggling, you keep changing strafes rapidly in the same area that it becomes painfully obvious, and the enemy's tracking becomes passive because they expect you to keep doing that. Spinning makes it so you're very unpredictable for a short amount of time that the enemy gets really confused. So, they have a lower rhythm and track you passively because you confuse them. You can come up with your own ways of being extremely predictable or extremely unpredictable to get the same results. Tracking and rhythm. I'll be expanding on rhythm's definition. Rhythm, or more specifically reaction rhythm, is how often the enemy registers events in their mind, interpret it, and choose to act or not act on them. If a player is new to TF2, they will have a lower reaction rhythm because they take more time to interpret and make a decision on whatever relevant or irrelevant event they registered in their mind. If a player is good at TF2, they will have a high rhythm because they know nearly all the potential relevant events they can register, how to interpret them, and what decision to make in each possible event. This is why also a good player can have low rhythm if you surprise them. When you surprise someone, they have to register an event they didn't even consider possible in a given situation. And when you surprise someone, they take time to interpret and respond to that unexpected event. Now I'll be explaining attack rhythm. Attack rhythm is the enemy's attack interval. This is attack rhythm. If the enemy doesn't attack you on its attack rhythm, then after cooldown rely on twitching your movement to their reaction rhythm to throw off their attack, because they're usually waiting for you to change your movement. When you're timing the enemy's attack rhythm, you're usually timing when the enemy turns active. When the enemy is passively tracking you, especially not moving their mouse, they are choosing not to turn or move their mouse much to rhythm. Rhythm still applies when the enemy is aware of you and doesn't seem to turn to you. Get too far off their screen and they will turn when their rhythm catches up. If the enemy is moving their mouse frequently to a high rhythm, but their mouse doesn't move that much side to side, I also consider that passive. Same thing can apply if the enemy's rhythm is so extremely slow that they're passively tracking you until their rhythm kicks in and actively track you. Tracking and movement patterns. All the enemy movement patterns, except for async, rely on the enemy tracking you while holding down a movement key. If the enemy is holding W and tracking you, they're always going after you. If the enemy is holding S and tracking you, they're always going away from you. If the enemy is standing still and the enemy is tracking you while holding one of their strafe keys, they're always going around you. If you're strafing one way and the enemy goes the opposite direction with their strafe, they're always going around you while tracking you. If you're strafing one way and the enemy copies that strafe, then the enemy goes along you most of the time. If you're strafing and the enemy is copying your strafes while being ahead of you or faster than you, then they're going around you while tracking you. When it comes to async, the enemy doesn't try to track you with their movement or their mouse. They only track you and switch off async once you're close and or off their screen. Now I'll be covering movement patterns that are mixed. I'll start with the mixed tracking movement patterns. There are only 4 mixed tracking movement patterns, and they are after along, after around, away along, and away around. So basically the enemy tracks you while holding W with a strafe key or S with a strafe key. Movement patterns can be categorized into passive and active movement patterns. Passive movement patterns are movement patterns where the enemy barely moves their mouse randomly, or doesn't move their mouse at all to keep track of you while moving. While active movement patterns are movement patterns where the enemy moves their mouse a lot to keep track of you while moving. I'll give you an example of the movement patterns that are active and passive. After and around are active movement patterns. Away and along are passive movement patterns. All the mixed movement patterns with after are active movement patterns. All the mixed movement patterns with away are passive movement patterns. Just because these movement patterns are generally active or passive doesn't mean they can't change it from time to time, but generally that is the case. Someone going after you can go passive if they expect you to stay still or change movement in a general direction, so they can go passive that way. You usually counter this by going around them while twitching a strafe and or a head fake. Someone going around are still going to move their mouse, but they might not move their mouse enough for you to matador them normally, or by going forwards then backwards into a back pedal. Then you consider them passive and go around them to their closest side to you instead. But usually you counter the active movement patterns by switching your movement to their rhythm and stabbing to rhythm when you think they will be turned away enough for a stab. When it comes to the passive movement patterns, they can go active if you go too far away from their screen if they have the time to react to it. So they go active for a bit, then go back to being passive again to keep you on their screen. But usually you counter passive movement patterns by going around them to their closest side to you or getting them in a back pedal. When it comes to movement patterns, the only reason you should learn them is so you can understand how it impacts the enemy's tracking and how you close the distance between you and the enemy. Practice. If you practice everything I told you in my videos, then I recommend doing spy 1v1s to improve at manipulating and predicting enemy tracking. A good place to 1v1 is on the Spy Academy servers. The map is called tr_spy. When doing a 1v1, you should recognize when the enemy is passively and actively tracking you and try to counter it. Make sure you're not constantly running away from the other spy and he doesn't either, so both of you can improve without wasting time. These 1v1s will help you recognize how the enemy tracks you in the pub and counter it. If you want to improve your map navigation and movement, I recommend practicing on climb.tf. There is a leaderboard for map times and you can practice long jumping with in-game stats. Now I'll be covering things that supplement tracking, rhythm and movement patterns. Goals. When it comes to predicting the enemy, you should determine their goals. If you can determine the enemy's goals, predicting them and baiting them will be so much easier. If someone's main goal is to hunt you down and kill you, then you can use that goal against them. You can run away from them, making them more willing to chase you, and use that to get an easier stab on them. If you stab an NG's building, his goal might be to save that building more than killing you. You can predict the NG better on what he's going to do next and be able to manipulate and exploit that goal of his. You can back away from the NG's building, then go back into it to get a stab on the NG when he redirects his focus on his building. If you think the enemy's goal is close distance between you and him, then you can predict he's going to go after you. If you think the enemy's goal is to keep as much distance between you and him, then you can predict that he's going to go away from you. If you think the enemy wants to backstab you, then you can predict that he's going to go around you or he's going to be acing to make you turn for Matador. If you think the enemy wants to hit his shots using his movement, then he's going to copy your strafes and go along you. Knowing the enemy's goal will help you massively with prediction. Emotion. If you know the enemy's emotional state, it can help you predict certain things about their movement patterns, rhythm and tracking. When the enemy is fearful of you, they will usually go away from you. If you surprise the enemy, they're going to have a low rhythm. They'll track you actively and they will go away from you eventually. Sometimes the enemy is really cocky. They're usually high rhythm and will passively track you. If you make the enemy feel safe, they're going to be medium to low rhythm and actively track you because they're going to take your movement at face value. If you annoy the enemy or make them really angry, then they will actively track you and go after you. Skill. If you know an enemy's skill level, you can predict certain things about their movement patterns, rhythm and tracking as well. If the enemy has low skill, then part 1 would be enough to deal with these players. You just need to move to their low rhythm usually and are passive before they react to you. Once they react to you, they're active for a bit. If the enemy has medium skill, then part 1 is also enough for them, most of the time as well. They usually move their mouse to medium rhythm and can be countered by assuming they're gonna actively track you most of the time. If the enemy has high skill, then passive and active tracking really start to matter and have a high rhythm. Ideally, you use a lot of bait to stab them as well. Backup plan. When it comes to backup plans, you should have a plan B for things that you suspect might go wrong. If you jump into a group of players, a lot of things can go wrong, but you can have a backup plan and have an escape route in mind if you can't get any stabs. This can also apply to trickstabbing multiple opponents, where if someone is running away from you, then you go for a different player because you had them as a plan B for a stab. Jumping. When you jump, the enemy is going to believe your air strafes most of the time and will turn more. If people will use this enough, then in the future it will be hard to pull off, so use it while you can, using air strafes to matador your opponents. Pre-stabbing. Pre-stabbing is when you attempt trick stabs around common paths in case you meet an opponent. If you're near enemy spawn, you can do matador movements and matador enemies that leave spawn. When you're near a corner, you can always prepare for a corner stab. When there is a corner with an incline near it, then you can do a stair stab before you leave the corner, then prepare for a corner stab if no one appears. Pre-stabbing is a great way to get your feet wet with trick stabbing if you're really new. I recommend practicing this skill on a map called TR_corner stab. Tension. Tension is a term that Slurgy came up with, so I'll be borrowing it. Tension is when you make the enemy think you're unaware of them and don't see them, so the enemy gets fooled into thinking that you won't trick stab them when you actually will. This relates a bit to the emotion concept. You make the enemy feel safe, so they're easier to trick or predict when you're going for a trick stab. This concept also relates to pre-stabbing because sometimes you predict someone will turn a corner by a certain time and you pre-stab them with that timing in mind. Mirroring. When your opponent is trying to keep distance between you and himself, then you should also try to keep distance. If the enemy is trying to close distance with you, then you should close distance with them as well. You should nearly always reciprocate the enemy's aggression. Now I'll be moving on to certain things about chaining. To get chains, you're gonna have to learn nearly everything I've covered in my tutorials when it comes to stabbing. When you want to get a chain opportunity, you want to be sandwiched between the enemy. When you have enemies behind you, they feel more safe because you're not looking at them, and so they are comfortable to believe your movement and go after you. You also employ player bait at the same time, sandwiching yourself between your opponents. You can use this to your advantage when you can't get a stab on the enemies behind you, or it's going to take a bit of time. Don't just follow one person when facing a group of players. If someone in front of you is hard to stab, you go for the people behind you. Then you've probably baited the guy that was hard to stab and you can 180 back to him. You should also pay attention to spawn waves and try to strike at a spawn wave for a chain opportunity. Also, make sure you use the environment to improve your chances of getting a chain, like using corner stabs, under stabs, and jump stabs. And remember to always keep moving. Never stay in one spot unless you're switching to opponents behind you. Try to go from area to area, deeper into enemy territory. Now I'll be reviewing some clips. Okay, everything in that clip that you've just done was basically perfect. You missed the stab on the pyro, but personally I would have missed that as well, because when you were going for that stab, you were probably expecting him to not turn into the wall like an idiot with W. So you thought that he might like try to go around you with a strafe key, but instead he just goes W into the wall. So I can't blame you for that. I would have made the same mistake as well, because you can't predict like stupid behavior like that sometimes. But when it came to your rhythm, it was really good. The pyro, whenever the pyro was running away from you, you ran away from him. And when the pyro was going after you, you went after him. So overall, I'd say you did everything right in this clip.
What is this guy doing? Bro, what are you doing? A beautiful view, isn't it?
So once again, like your previous clip, the rhythm was pretty good. The only thing about it was the pyro stab. With the pyro, you should have strafed left instead of like trying to strafe left and then screwing it up and then bumping into him. You should have strafed left when you were jumping off and then went in the opposite direction when you turned for him for a matador. So that's my only gripe with it, but everything else was good. So keep it up.
What's the matter? Why is the car not moving?
Okay, the rhythm in this clip was alright, it was good. And just two things about it that were a little bit off to me is when you were going for the medic for the first stab, I think you could have just went around him with a twitch strafe and gotten him, because when you were sapping the telly and you were turned away from him, he was probably like passively tracking you. So I think he would have been surprised if you did that, and he was like probably passively tracking you with low rhythm. So you should have just went around him. So, and with the soldier at the end, you jumped a little bit too low on the stairs that he saw your feet. So you had to do a ghost stab basically. When you're doing tension stabs like that off stairs, you want to you don't want your feet to be visible next to the doorway. You want to be high up enough that the enemy goes through the doorway and they don't see your feet until it's too late. That's my only gripe with it. But other than that, it was pretty good. Keep it up. Okay, on the medic, I think you would have gotten the stab if you paid attention to the collision hull alignment. I have a Spy 101 video on collision, and it talks about map alignment. If you watch it, I think you'd understand that you have to pay attention to that sometimes to get like tighter stabs. If you do not pay attention to that, your stabs are going to be a little bit more loose. So I would have done it a little bit tighter on that medic, and I might have had a higher chance of getting him, but who knows. And on the sniper with the danger shield, I think you could have just gotten him with a stair stab near the spawn, because he was going after you, then away from you. You could have just went with the stair stab, and yeah. The way I see it, your playstyle is mostly jiggling and twitch strafing, which seems pretty good. So keep it up. Okay, in that clip, yeah, it confirms it to me that you need to pay attention to the collision hull alignment. As I've said, it's in a Spy 101 video on collision and whatever. You should pay attention to it so you can get tighter stabs, because your stabs are... It's good to have loose stabs a lot of the time. Yakin and Eternal have loose stabs, but like... You want to make your stabs tighter sometimes, and you want to collide going into the enemy. And you can't really collide going into the enemy to their side without knowing how their collision hull is aligned. Like, your playstyle would be good in, let's say, Venice, where it's like really screwed up map alignment, but on these types of maps, they're pretty solid. So you should pay attention to the collision hull alignment, how it's rotated, so you can get the stabs even tighter. That's all. Okay, with that clip, that was not a 4K, you lying little bastard. That was a 3K. That was 3 trick stabs, not 4. So, you liar. But, thing is, you did pretty well there. You baited the enemy. You might be a newer player, but you got the rhythm right, and you focused on baiting the enemy and going into you, and just making them a little bit frustrated. So, they go after you, and you move to their rhythm and stab them. So, I'd say keep it up. Okay, in this clip, he didn't mistitle it, he called it a free man. So, this one is not a liar. And the first 2 stabs, the one on the demo and the sniper, you could have gotten them by going around them, because the demo was passively tracking you. Like, he was looking away, but it was clear that he was like very bad at tracking, and that he was like very slow. So he was basically passively tracking you, so you could have just went around them. Same thing with the sniper, he seemed very bad at tracking, so you should have like went around him. If someone's like very bad at tracking, like terrible, like they randomly track you or they're very slow, then you just go around them. But other than that, the free stabs that you got were pretty clean. So I'll give you that. Okay, that free man was alright, but one thing with the backpedal on that soldier, you should have turned your head to the left more, because if you turned it left more and you went for the backpedal, you would have made him turn more. Usually on like other types of players other than that guy, that would have like failed because you didn't turn your head enough to the left. So yeah, you got a little bit lucky there with that soldier, but other than that, nice clip.
You got blood on my suit.